Welcome to today's tutorial, where I'll be teaching you how to create this fun and unique interactive cat-o'-lantern sandwich cookie. To get started on today's project, we're going to need 3 baked cookies: a plain base-shaped pumpkin, one with its eyes and mouth cut out, and this little cat cookie. I rolled the 2 pumpkin cookies to about 1/6 of an inch thickness, and then the cat to about 1/4 inch. This is because the cat will be sitting on top of the base pumpkin like this, and I want to make sure it's sturdy so that the little hat doesn't crack off if any pressure is put on it. So it's a bit thicker and sturdier. We'll be using royal icing in just 4 colors. All of these will be hybrid consistency. So I have a pumpkin orange. This one was supposed to be dark gray, but it's kind of matured closer to black. And then we have yellow for the cat eyes and green for the pumpkin stem. Hybrid consistency means it needs to be as thick as possible, but still able to settle into a smooth surface. You can test for the right icing consistency while mixing it by giving the bowl a little shake and making sure that all the lines and ridges flatten out, like this. We'll also be adding painted effects to make these shapes really pop after our royal icing dries. So I've got a whole array of colors here. I'll be using a combination of powdered colors and poppy paints. We're looking for an array of shades that coordinate with the icing. So I've got a green, a terracotta orange, brown for shading, and yellow and black. Oh, and I forgot to grab a couple. I'll also be using pink and gray poppy paint for the cat cookie. And then you'll also need some pastillage. This will be used to create a backing layer for the pumpkin because the final build will sit with our cat inside the pumpkin. I've linked the recipe below. I want the pastillage layer to be incredibly thin because I just want it as a backing layer in order to give the pumpkin a look like it's actually carved. So I'm going to be rolling it very thin with my fondant roller. I'm using the thinnest standard little spacer on my fondant roller. If you've never worked with pastillage, it starts out pretty dry and crumbly, and then once you knead it, it gets a little bit sticky. So I always keep cornstarch handy and a nice fluffy dusting brush, and I constantly dust as I'm rolling. And then I just want to continually dust the surface as I roll, so I dust and flip and roll and dust and flip and roll just to make sure it stays nice and removable. I'm using a lot of pressure when I'm rolling because, again, I want this to be extremely thin. So you can see how thin this is, kind of like fabric. So let's find a good spot for the template, and then using a very sharp craft blade, we're just going to cut really cleanly around this pumpkin shape. I'll set this aside until it's nice and dry, and I'll be able to carefully pick it up without bending or cracking it. I'm going to paint the inside edges of these cutouts a deep orange to really help this look like a carved face. Using orange hybrid consistency royal icing, I'm going to trace along all these outlines and edges. I used a black edible marker and a projector to trace these shapes. And when doing that, I also colored in his little nose with black. I'm going to trace around that too so that it looks a little bit recessed. Then I'm going to continue with the rest of the outlines. Next, I'm going to flood every other section, then allow them to dry before flooding the remaining sections. This will keep each piece separated and looking individually puffy. Once they've all dried, I'll go back and exaggerate the 3D-ness of the shapes with some painted effects. If the icing isn't settling into a smooth surface on its own, you can use a scribe tool or toothpick to help smooth it out. My favorite way to speed up dry time is to set the cookie in front of a tabletop fan for about 10 minutes. So the first 3 sections have dried a bit, and now I'm going to flood these remaining 2 sections. While we wait for the pumpkin to dry so we can paint it, let's go ahead and move on to the cat. I'm going to start by painting his inner ears pink directly onto the cookie using poppy paint in Sweetheart Pink. This way, when I pipe around them, they'll look a bit recessed. Then outline and flood the outer sections of the ears with dark gray hybrid consistency royal icing. Next, I'm going to trace over all my cat outlines. Flood the face and feet, and let those sections dry for a few minutes. While that's drying, I'm going to outline and flood the outside and center sections of his pumpkin cap. And then, while that's drying, I'm going to move on to the tail and body. When flooding the body, make sure to work carefully around the leg outlines so they don't get covered. And then flood the final 2 sections of the pumpkin cap. Pipe domed eyeballs with the yellow royal icing. It really helps to set these sections in front of a fan to dry so they don't crater. I scraped off my first stem because I didn't like it at all. I want it to feel like it's twisting a bit, so I'm going to pipe a few slightly curved twisted sections for this second try. I want the pumpkin cap to stand out a bit above the rest of this cat cookie, so I'm going to pipe 1 to 2 more layers of royal icing on top. Using brown and terracotta food coloring thinned with sugar art color solution, I'm going to shade the areas of the pumpkin that would be the most recessed in real life. Curve the edges of your shadows to keep each section looking rounded. You can use a clean brush to dab on some color solution to help blend out any rough edges. Next come the highlights. I'm mixing a light yellowish hue and will dab it into the center area of this middle section. Using a fluffier brush while the paint is still damp, I'm just going to dab, dab, dab and buff, buff, buff until the edges are nicely blended and softened. On a real pumpkin, this section would be sitting the furthest forward and catching the most light. And I'm just going to do a little bit of a light touch on these sections too. So focusing mostly on the top area and then blending down. And then just a teeny tiny bit at the top of these outside sections, just to give them a little bit of a highlight too. And then I'm just going to add a few highlights using a very, very fine detail brush and white poppy paint. And this is just going to hit very specific areas to add to the rounded, shiny effect. So I'm going to go on this edge, around his nose, and then here, and then up here. We're going to go all around the cutouts. I'm just adding thin lines where the light might naturally reflect, and this will also really highlight those cutouts once they're backed by the black pastillage. See how it just gives him more character? It's so fun to add these little details. Then for the final touch, I want to add some warts. So I'm going back to my orange royal icing, and these don't have to be perfect. We just want them to look like little lumps and bumps. Alright, now my pastillage is dry, so I'm going to go ahead and prep this to attach to my pumpkin. And I just want to show you how thin it actually is. It's pretty paper thin, so be sure to handle it really carefully. I could have just painted the eyes and mouth directly onto the cookie and then piped around them, but I really wanted it to have a carved effect and to be a total surprise that the cat can be lifted out. You don't have to paint the whole thing black, just where the cutouts will fall. This is Sugar Art Master Elite Black mixed with their color solution, and it's so nice and inky black. This color dries really fast, so I'll be able to attach everything in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to use my blackish royal icing to attach the pumpkin cookie to the pastillage. And all we're going to do is make sure we have a nice amount of coverage. I don't want it to seep, but I want it to stick securely. All right, and then let's drop that on. There we go. I love how this looks. See how cool that is? It has this really intense sense of depth and of being carved. I want to add one more tiny detail that'll add some spooky additional depth. So I'm going to paint a teeny tiny white pupil into each eye. It's going to add the coolest effect. I'm going to start with this eye and just very carefully paint a little white pupil. And then this one is going to go right here. And how fabulous does that look? Look at him! It just gives such a trippy 3D effect. And now we need to add highlights and shadows to the cat's itty bitty little pumpkin cap so that it matches our pumpkin. These will be way more highlighted at the top, as if our pumpkin highlights continued, which is what we're aiming for. So it doesn't hurt to hover this cookie over the top and just see where these highlights should go so everything lines up really nicely. Now onto our cute little cat. First off, I want the eyeballs to look very rounded, so I'm going to shade around the outside with orange. And just blend, blend, blend. See how they're already looking very rounded? Then I'm going to add a light yellow in the center. And then again, blend, blend, blend. The overall effect is just going for a highlight in the center and working our way out to a shadow so they look very nice and round and glowy. Then using a small detail brush again, I'm going to add black pupils, followed by 2 white highlights on each eye. I'm piping his little nose with orange and will paint it pink after it dries. You can use a scribe or toothpick to help shape it. Next, I'm going to use gray poppy paint to add dimension to the body and also some fur details to the body and face. And then I'm going to just really quickly add some shadows and highlights to the pumpkin stem to make the textures pop a bit more. For this final step, I'm going to be piping a border of dark chocolate ganache around the outside and lower edges of the bottom cookie so that the decorated pumpkin can sit on top and allow room for the cat cookie to slide in and out. We want his little pumpkin hat to be aligned right with the top edge of the pumpkin. His feet need a base layer to sit on, so I'm going to mark exactly where that will go and then mark the edges. I want the ganache border to be tall enough so that the cat has room to fit easily, so you can measure to be more precise. It looks like I'll need my border to be at least ½ inch tall. I'm going to pipe 2 to 3 layers of ganache on top of each other to make sure I reach the right height. After attaching the top piece, I'm going to make sure it sticks securely, and then I'm going to refrigerate the cookie for at least 10 to 15 minutes to really quickly set the ganache so it doesn't risk squishing down. Alright, here's the final piece. I didn't like how the scalloped edge looked, so I just smoothed it out, which looks so much better. So we've got our sandwich cookie with our trippy little eyeball effect, and then we have our little cat, which should slide right into this space, and there's the finished piece. I'm really happy with how that turned out. If you want to continue leveling up your decorating skills, click or tap the screen to learn my never-failed trick for consistently making amazing royal icing. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that thumbs up and leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you think.